The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
On this episode, we have Kevin Zanjani with Bioenno Power, providing us insight into LiFePO4 batteries and solar power. This is the Ham Radio 360 Field Radio Podcast. This show is brought to you by Chameleon Antenna, versatile, dependable, stealth, and built to last. I'm your host, John Jacobs, W7DBO, Whiskey 7 Delta Bravo Oscar. I'm a third-generation amateur radio operator, and I reside in Utah with my family. If this is your first time hearing the show, thank you for clicking and tuning in. This show is part of the Ham Radio 360 network. This show releases every other Thursday, and the Workbench with George and Jeremy releases the opposing Tuesdays. Kale with the original Ham Radio 360 show releases the Tuesday before this show, but he is on a short vacation until the new year. You can find our show notes and links on the web at fieldradiopodcast.org. Also be sure to check out our YouTube channel for expanded content, product reviews, and much, much more that's not included in the podcast. In the news segment, I mentioned last time I was recorded for the Everything Ham Radio podcast, and that aired last week. You can hear that interview where we talk about the show, WhisperNet, and West Mountain Gear. You can find more information about his show at everythinghamradio.com. I have also been working through the release of the Tapern Digital Communications Conference videos. If you are not aware, the Tapern Group holds a national conference annually, as well as presentations at the Dayton Hamvention forums. Gary Pierce, KN4AQ, with the Ham Radio Now TV, does a professional job recording these presentations and posting them to his website for viewing. The Digital Communications Conference is a great opportunity to get information on technical topics surrounding amateur radio. I encourage you to check out these videos at hamradionow.tv. Our guest this episode is Kevin Zanjani of Bioenno Power. Bioenno Power is the company producing the LiFePO4 batteries that work in a ranging applications of field radio work. They also have an impressive solar lineup to support the batteries. Bioenno Power has made a serious investment in the amateur radio hobby, traveling the nation supporting our hamfests and conventions, and most importantly, bringing products to production that meet our demands for power. I hope you enjoy this interview. We'd like to welcome to the podcast Kevin Zanjani, KI6DHQ, Kilo India 6, Delta Hotel, Quebec. He's the national sales manager of Bioenno Power out of Santa Ana, California. Kevin and I hooked up probably a year and a half, 2 years ago when I started the Comms to Go business, and identified his battery as being an excellent source for field radio work. And as a lot of you have found out, if you've gone to hamfests or conventions around the nation, you've seen Bioenno there. And so we'd like to welcome to the show, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. It's great opportunity to be on the podcast. And we do have a lot to share about us and about the company. So certainly appreciate the invitation.
Okay. So what we start off with, just introduce yourself and since we're talking about Bioenno Power, the company, and it's kind of your elevator pitch.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kevin Zanjani, KI6DHQ, Bioenno Power. We're based in Santa Ana, California, about 10 minutes south of Disneyland in Orange County. So if your viewers or listeners have been out to the region, they're probably familiar with the lay of the land. Our company, we were founded in 2010. We brought products to market in 2012. So our company focuses on lithium iron phosphate batteries technology, as well as various types of solar products for use with radio communications equipment, ham radio equipment. And we're also, we'll talk about later on, we're in other markets as well. And so these particular battery products are pretty exciting because they offer a very large number of charge cycles compared to lead acid or AGM batteries. So a battery that offers about 2,000 charge cycles, and then all of the batteries have built-in circuitry, which we'll talk about later on. Very compact, very lightweight, great for portable applications, field applications. So there's a lot of cool features and benefits with this technology. And so a lot to share.
Yeah. So when you were starting this, I guess the three competing battery chemistries is AGM or SIL less acid batteries, SLAs, lithium ion phosphate, then lithium iron phosphate, which is what your company is specializing in. What was it you said that besides the charge cycles, what was it you found with lithium iron that was the product that you wanted to promote and sell?
Sure. So, the history of batteries, let's start off with the SLA or AGM battery. So that was the existing chemistry that's out there, that was available, and it's still available. That particular chemistry, as you know, the batteries are very, very heavy. Lead acid batteries, though they're really cost effective, for portable operation, they're kind of a pain to carry around. They have issues with sulfation and acid and a lot of other problems as well. And so we came out with a better battery, lithium iron phosphate, LiFePO4. Now, the second chemistry you're talking about, lithium ion, we want to differentiate that here. So lithium iron phosphate, LiFePO4, different than traditional lithium ion, ION, which is based on another chemistry called cobalt oxide, lithium cobalt oxide. And those are the batteries that are in your cell phones and laptop computers. And the issues with those is that both the charge cycles are a lot less, maybe about 600 to 800 cycles on a lithium ion battery, maybe 200 to 300 cycles on an AGM or lead acid battery. And lithium ion, ION, has stability issues, so you've been hearing about on the news, versus lithium iron, which is our chemistry, IRON phosphate, which offers a very tight chemical bond. So from a safety standpoint, it's a lot better to deal with. The cycle life is significantly longer compared to the both AGM and ion batteries. So iron phosphate gives you that cycle life there. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to offer is a battery solution that gets you that high cycle life. And also the second aspect of it is the voltage on the battery. The open circuit operating voltage tends to be quite high enough that matches up with radio communications equipment, and a battery that can replace a traditional SLA configuration. So if you look at the operating and open circuit voltage, it's about 13.2 volts, which matches up with radio pretty nicely, which wants to see 13.8 volts plus or minus 15%. So there's some big advantages there on the operating voltage side with lithium iron phosphate batteries. So those are, we're offering this type of solution. There was not much available on the market. So that's something we wanted to do, is offer that so that we could have better performance with radiocom equipment and radio equipment.
So you have you talk about the lithium iron, you have deep cycle batteries. Is there a lithium iron out there that's not deep cycle, or is lithium iron inherently considered a deep cycle battery?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's to qualify a deep cycle battery, it basically means, we're talking about lithium iron phosphate deep cycle batteries, means that the battery has a sufficient amount of capacity inside of the battery to operate electronics, ham radio equipment, other types of equipment over a long period of time, several hours. So there's enough cells in there that get you the capacity that you need in order to get the really extended long run times. And when we say deep cycle, the discharge current on these batteries for a deep cycle application tends to be twice its capacity. So in other words, let's say I have roughly twice its capacity. So if I have, let's say, a 12 volt, 20 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery, it can put up to 2 times its capacity out in terms of continuous discharge current. So about 40 amps 2C on that. And so that gives you a bit of an idea of like the discharge current and then the capacity as well. Now we differentiate that from a high discharge lithium iron phosphate battery that's used for starting or cranking applications. So let's say I want to start a motorcycle, start a small engine. We do actually offer a separate line that's different. And the reason it's different is the cells we use in a starter line is different than a deep cycle line, because the starter cells can provide a huge burst of current to start the engine, but the capacity is less. So those packs that are used for starting don't have the capacity, they have the discharge current. Whereas the deep cycle line, we have the capacity in there for running electronics equipment. We're going for capacity, and then discharge current is going to be less. So deep cycle, lower discharge current, but very large capacity. A starter battery has a high discharge current, but a low capacity. And the way that we do we make the tweak is there's inside of the lithium iron phosphate batteries for the starter ones, we changed a little bit of the electrolyte that's used inside of the battery to give a high discharge current. And then the cell size would be less number of cells, but they can provide that high current. And then the deep cycle, which is used for radio communications equipment, we put a lot of cells into series and parallel inside of the pack, and then we put more of them in parallel to achieve the runtime that's needed for the equipment. So that's the difference there.
Okay, so I've seen, and I've done some tests with this. You see the lithium ion, jump starters. It does great to start the car, but then I put a simple LED light on it, and I'd say within an hour the thing was, and that was a very low draw, basically a LED flashlight. The battery was gone.
And there's a couple of reasons. One is, again, so that little pack there has a limited capacity, but it has a high discharge current for starting. The second issue is with those jump packs, the operating voltage is a lot lower than lithium iron phosphate batteries. So you're dealing with a low operating voltage, probably somewhere, depending on the pack, it could be anywhere between 7.1 to 11.1 volts, and then they use what they call DC-DC converters to up the voltage through the barrel plug output. So it was not really truly intended for a deep cycle application by any means, which is why you get that really, really short runtime on those packs versus a traditional lithium iron phosphate battery, which has a deep cycle one that has the correct number of cells to achieve the capacity that's required to run the equipment.
Okay. So with your batteries, I've yet to dare slice open the plastic wrap to dig one apart. How many cells is there in the batteries? And do you, and like you said, you have some in series, some in parallel. Does that change, say you're going from your 8 amp hour up to your 40 amp hour?
Yeah, that's a good question. So depending on the size of the pack, we have all the batteries that we offer for the deep cycle application are based on what we call cylindrical cells. So they're little cylinders in the battery. Each of them are put into an array, a configuration, to achieve the right voltage and the right capacity. So with respect to we say a 12 volt pack, which actually has an open circuit voltage of 13.2 volts, it's in a 4S configuration, and then we put many in parallel to achieve the capacity. So if we have, let's say, a 3 amp hour, it's a 4S in 1P, meaning there's 4 cells in there. We go to 6 amp hour, then it becomes 8 cells, and then we go up from there. So then 9 becomes 12 cells, and then 12 amp hour becomes 16 cells. And then 15 amp hour becomes 20 cells, and then the 20 amp hour becomes, I think, 24 cells, and so on and so forth. So we keep adding additional cells in parallel to the original cells to achieve the capacity. Then what we do is that all that gets spot welded. So in the pack, if you were to cut it open, there's a whole array of cylindrical cells. There's spot welds across all of them, and then we add a circuit board. And the circuit board has what they call pads on it, and there are pads that come out of it, and there are leads that come out of the pads, jumper wires that go and monitor all the cells. And what that does is it balances or equalizes the cells. So the circuit board has a feature in there that will equalize the cells when the battery gets charged up to ensure that everything is equalized across the cell pack so that everything is discharging correctly into the load, so that the cells are effectively discharging to the radio equipment or whatever other load it could be. And that's how they're built. The building blocks are the cylindrical cells, and then we add more in parallel to make the capacity larger, and then we'll use the circuit boards that will be for each different discharge currents that required when we build the pack. So we have different circuit boards that are used based on the capacity of the pack, because the larger the capacity, the more current handling capability the pack can handle for discharging into a load. So we can use larger circuit boards for very high discharge current. Like, for example, if we do the 20 amp hour, we're actually using a 40 amp circuit board in there to handle 40 amps. If we go to something larger, let's say the 40 amp hour pack, then we go up from there. We may go to like a 60 amp board on that. And then the smaller battery packs have smaller circuit boards in there. So we kind of tune or adjust based on the batteries, based on the capacity, and also based on the discharge current.
Okay, so I just learned something. That's why on your 40 amp hour battery you have a 60 amp Anderson power connector.
That's right.
I never knew that.
Yeah, which is good. Whenever we get questions about that, why is the connector? Why do you guys have to change it? Well, we change it because we have to accommodate. We have to anticipate the customer is going to have a high discharge current. Okay. So then we have to change connectors to do that. So then we change connectors. We may have to change gauge of wires, et cetera, as the battery pack gets larger. So that's why the connectors do get a little bit larger in there. And then there's then smaller connectors used for smaller battery packs as well. So there's that's what ends up happening.
Okay. So you said the circuitry does the load balancing on the charge, and that's why your chargers are. When I talk to people about this, they're often wondering why you have such a simple charger. It's because all of the work has been done in the pack instead of in the charger.
Yeah, that's right. So effectively the charger, to be more accurate, is a current limited constant voltage power supply. So we say we call it a charger, but in fact it's a power supply. That's why it looks very simple. Yeah. Because the circuitry in the battery is handling all of the balancing function. It's handling the over discharge, over current, over voltage, over protections and temperature and short circuit protection. That's all built into the battery itself. So effectively, what you can do to charge the batteries is you can use a power supply to charge it up. That has a constant voltage, and then it's current limited based on the size of the battery, and that's it. So you could actually use benchtop supplies if you wanted to charge up the batteries. Customers, what they typically do is they like to buy the batteries with the charger as a bundle, and then put it inside of whatever they want to put it in and take that with them. So that option is there. But yeah, so there's some flexibility in that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think this is a key point if you're looking, especially you're going into, QRP SOTA operations where you're trying to keep your equipment very minimal, very simplistic. Like what Kevin just mentioned was in this little tiny, very lightweight battery, you're getting all these low voltage disconnect, high voltage. You're getting all this things that are bundled up in the packaging. You're not going to have to worry about if you're operating in the field, or like in my case, when I build boxes for people, it takes out all that circuitry. It simplifies everything and dials it right down inside the battery. So when you look at the battery, you're actually getting a whole bunch of things that if you did, say you tried building your own or went with something else, you have a bunch of functionality that's already built in the battery for you.
Yeah, that's correct. So that functionality is internalized within the pack. So it takes the guesswork out of a lot of stuff when operating with the equipment. Definitely.
And so you have typically two cables coming out of your packs. And as we've kind of talked before offline, when I've been kind of working on these packs, one is usually a barrel plug for the charger, but when you get up into the higher ones, it's an Anderson power pole. We've kind of talked about it, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are just pretty much going to the same place and the same thing. So you can use them interchangeably?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's a barrel plug on the battery, and then there's a power pole connector on the battery as well. So it is wired in parallel on the circuit board, so that you could charge through either port. We set it up in a way with the barrel plug, so when you purchase the battery with the charger that has a barrel plug in there, and then you plug in the red-black power pole or gray power pole to the radio equipment, and then you could tuck the charger within the box. So if the customer buys a battery and the charger, then they could tuck the battery plugged into the barrel plug and then have the battery plugged into the equipment. So it's very simple in that regards. But yeah, you could charge through the power pole connectors, no problem.
So one question I seem to hear every once in a while is, can you be using the battery and charging at the same time for people that say want an UPS configuration?
Yeah, so UPS configurations, if you charge the battery while discharging it, there's a couple things you got to keep in mind. You can do it, but you got to keep in mind that the battery is going to be loaded while the supply is trying to deliver a charge current in there. So it takes longer to charge the battery because power is being diverted out of the battery into the load. So that's something to keep in mind there if you're doing that. But yeah, it won't damage the battery or the charger. So you could do that. Just to keep in mind, it takes longer to charge up.
Yeah, and if your draw on the battery is more than your charge capacity, obviously your reservoir is going to be slowly depleted that way too.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I noticed on Facebook you actually published somebody's article, or somebody had talked about using a solar charge controller in a vehicle to charge the battery via solar charge controller in the car.
Yeah, so in the vehicle, you can you have some flexibility in there as well. So you have that option with the batteries if you want to do that. It's not it would work fine for the application if need be.
Okay, and that's what some people have, and that's what the question I was trying to work out when I got a brand new Honda Civic, and I'm really not keen on trying to punch through the firewall and trying to get my power direct from the battery. And I thought, well, if I could have a Go box with the solar charge controller, then I can just plug it into the somewhere in the car and kind of use the battery as the amp draw. And so that kind of solves some people's issues with vehicles where you just don't dare get a line from the battery.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay. Yep. So if you don't want to drill through that exactly. Yep.
So you have different types of chargers. You typically bundle them, the lower amp chargers with the lower amp batteries. Can you use the higher amp? Can you use any of your chargers on the batteries with the higher amps, or do you need to keep the low amp batteries with the low amp hour? You
can use the larger ones. It's not an issue there. It's a power supply. So the current limiting will take place in the battery, so you don't have any issues in that regards with using the large ones if customers want to. What we've done is we're bundling it together to make the price palatable for customers that want a kit to get going when they're right out the door when they purchase. So that's why we do that for customers.
Okay. And you have published 2 documents. I think they're going to be literally the Bible of what to expect with your draw. There's one where you had was it a 2080 listen to load? And so you kind of went through your batteries and said, this is the expected time you're going to expect to get out of the batteries. And then there's another chart where you have 50 to 50. So what is the recommendation? Say you're running that KX2, your QRP, what's the ideal battery for SOTA type operations, or just field?
Yeah, so for QRP radios, so we break it up into 2 types. So for your QRP operation, so if like a KX2, if that's a very, very low power consumption radio, we typically suggest 3 amp, 4.5 amp, 6 amp hour, 9 amp hour batteries. Those tend to be the most popular for KX2 and KX3. And also the 817 as well. So the QRP radios, you can certainly use the smaller batteries. You can also use, the smaller batteries, what most customers get, because they're going to be backpacking, and they want to keep the weight very low, and they want to make the configuration very compact. So that's why they usually get the smaller batteries, really concerned about any kind of weight, trying to get as much weight savings as possible. So what we found is those customers that purchase those QRP radios, they're really concerned about the total weight of something they're going to carry on their back when they're going up a mountain or something like that. And that's what we found. But then some customers, it's not really a big deal, so they'll go with a 12 or a 15 or 20 amp hour, and then they'll just have an extended runtime. But yeah, you could certainly you have a lot of options, and that table will help in selecting a battery based on the runtime. So that's the number one question we get. So we publish that table. And then you can just find what your expected runtime is. And so some customers, they typically just want to go out for a day from when they wake up, right around sunrise. They want to go out, and then they want to operate radio till the evening hours. So we have a battery that will meet that runtime requirements. And then some customers, they actually want to charge the battery once and operate the whole weekend. And so we have other larger batteries that can do that as well. So there's a lot of options available.
I've always recommended with people that ask me, I say if it's VHF, UHF, and they may be operating full power, say for event support, I always say minimum 12 amp hour, but a full, say 8 or 12 hour operating day, like a net control, not a net control, but a special event station or something like that, where you're an aid station. I always say 20 is usually the sweet spot for that, if you want to be very, very comfortable with the power you have.
Yeah, so it depends on, VHF, UHF radios, mostly 50 watts. So yeah, 12 amp hours where you want to start if you're at 50 watts, I would say. You can go to the 15 and 20 amp hours as well. We found that 12 amp hour tends to be very common for 50 watt VHF, UHF, and then we'll talk about HF next. 100 watt radios. You're going to go to 15 and 20 amp hours for HF 100 watt radios. That's what we found in terms of the popularity. Now you can also go larger as well. 30 and 40 amp hours. We do have those available. We have all different sizes. So those can also be used with extended run times, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of said with HF. If you slice HF between QRP, say 20 watts and under, and then say regular HF, if you're running digital modes, 50 watts to 100, then that's why I always tell people it all depends on your runtime, but 40 amp hours seems to be, like I said, it depends on how long you want to go. But I think the important thing is people realize your batteries, you need to match the amp draw of your radio to the amp draw of the batteries. You can't say, well, I'm going to go out for a short time and operate 100 watts and do that on an 8 amp hour battery. Yeah,
that's correct. So the radio has the feature of a lot of the modern radios have the ability to dial in the power settings. So you have that capability. So if you're using a very large 100 watt radio, you can dial in lower power for battery as well. But enough customers that want to operate at the 100 watt output, and so you go to larger batteries to accomplish that. But you can certainly dial in lower power on the 100 watt radios as well, and then conserve power that way. So it depends on what the requirements are. But from what we've seen is typically for 100 watt radios, I would say it's going to be the 15 and 20 amp hour batteries. And for lower power VHF, UHF at 50 watts, it's going to be around the 12 amp hour. And then if you're going like 20 watts, then yeah, less than 12 amp hours. I would say 12, 9 and 12 amp hours, and 6 amp hours. So it just depends. Then you have other smaller QRP radios, as we mentioned before, the 817, and also the Elecraft. It's very low power consumption as well. So you go to smaller batteries.
So one of the magic, I always say that you have a lot of magic going on because it's the ability to do things, is lithium iron phosphate. I just got a West Mountain radio computer analyzer, and you were helping me get the settings on that right. It's really interesting to map the AGM battery. The minute you hit it with a load, it looks like a slippery slide. It's just sloping. Your voltage is dropping over time. One thing that's interesting, I guess I say the magic of lithium iron phosphate, is it has the ability to hold that voltage very much longer through the capacity of the battery, which actually gives you more life out of the battery. What's the scientific reason for it being able to hold that voltage so long?
You're talking about the fact that it can hold at a higher voltage?
Yeah, it'll hold at a higher voltage until about 90% of capacity, and then when it does drop, it drops pretty fast.
Yeah, so it's very, very constant power output. So lithium iron phosphate, the energy density, because of the chemical bonds, is quite high. So in other words, the amount of watt hours per unit volume and unit mass is higher than a lead acid battery. And then you also have the ability the chemical reaction tends to be quite efficient in terms of transferring directly to power output. So it has that capability in there versus traditional lead acid batteries, which doesn't have that built-in capability. So it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat. It's very robust, and it has the ability to provide that kind of, as we say, cycling capability and also discharge capability because of the chemical reactions that take place. And it's rechargeable over very long extended periods of time at 2,000 cycles. In there, you don't have that. It doesn't consume as fast. The reactions don't consume as fast. They don't finish up. It just continues to go, which is nice.
What is with AGM also? The harder you work it, the faster it dips.
Yeah.
And the voltage seems to drop by about 50% of capacity. I guess if you're charging your cell phone, you can still get down to 5 volts. But in the amateur radio world, we're done at about 50%. Can you work these a lot of draw and still get the same performance, or do you see a performance hit the harder you work the battery?
That's a good question. So these batteries are rated at typically you can pull 1 to 2 times its capacity, and you can push the battery at 1 to 2 times its capacity without any significant degradation. It's pretty nice because you can just key up and then it maintains the operating voltage, and then you can go all the way to its cutoff. In other words, you can operate until cutoff because the circuitry is built into it, and then it will shut off the output. The circuitry will just shut down the pack around 90 to 95% of the consumed amount. So in other words, let's say if I have a 12 volt 20 amp hour battery, right around 18 amp hours or so, the battery is going to get close to its cutoff voltage, and then it just shuts off. And that cutoff's around, I believe it's around 10.5 volts, and then it just shuts down that output. But along the whole spectrum from the whole 90 from 0 to 90 some percent, you're sitting at an operating voltage that's around 13-ish volts, around there, and it's pretty nice so that you don't have to worry about. First of all, you don't have to be using battery boosters with these batteries. You can plug it directly into the radio. It's a big advantage there as well. One less piece of electronics. So all that you can continue to operate over that full extent of the capacity that's available, and then that circuitry then shuts off the output. So it's a big advantage.
Yeah. So that was another thing I was going to mention was the use of the battery boosters. Once again, that's one less item that, of course, you're having to purchase, and that's one less item that you're needing to take into the field because this type of battery you're not getting your bang for your buck out of a battery booster with these.
Yeah, you don't need it with our batteries. It's not required. Battery boosters were for AGM and lead acid batteries because of the voltage drops that you get. Significant drops you get on an AGM or lead acid batteries, but because you're maintaining an operating voltage that's very constant throughout its whole cycle, from up until a bit over 90 some percent of its capacity, it's not required.
Okay. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, we talk about capacity needed in the field. One way to increase the capacity is integrate solar and solar charge controllers, and that's another line that you offer with your company.
Yeah, so the solar charge controllers are used in combination with the solar panels to charge the battery while you're operating. So what we've done is we've given the option of charging the battery with solar while operating the radio equipment. And what the role of the solar charge controller is, it takes the open circuit voltage of the solar panel, which is about 18 to 22 volts open circuit, and then it regulates and then converts the output to about between 14 and 15 volts to charge up the battery using a constant current and a constant voltage. Solar panels, you can't connect the solar panel directly to a radio equipment. Okay, that can't be done. And then you can't connect the solar panel directly to the battery. You have to use the controller to regulate the voltage and the current so that it delivers the correct charge current and charge voltage into the battery. And then what you do is the battery acts as a buffer. So the battery is buffering, and then it gets topped off, and then you then run the battery into the radio equipment, and then that will then allow you to charge while discharging into the radio using solar. So what you can set up is a battery that's topped off during the daytime, and then at night you can then operate your equipment, and then you resume charging back in the day. So we saw this during field day. We were operating solar panels and batteries here in Orange County. Various amateur radio clubs went around and demonstrated the fact that we set up the Orange County Amateur Radio Club, other radio clubs as well. You could operate a 120-watt solar panel. You could set up a battery, like a 40 amp hour battery, to operate various stations. Last year, they were operating a 40-meter station completely off batteries, and then this year they wanted to try PSK 31, all digital station, operating off batteries and solar. So it can be done. It's pretty simple. And my understanding now is, depending on how it's set up, you can get extra points using solar and battery for operations for field day. So it's not too difficult in that regards.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand is that the chain of connections and the various reasons why you should not try and change this outline is solar panel to controller, controller to battery, battery to radio in the most simplest terms. And like you've outlined, going panel to battery or panel to radio is going to overvolt your radio and then also undervolt it if a cloud comes by. If you go straight panel to battery, once again, you're going to overvolt. And I believe some batteries will actually, if the panel comes down, the battery will actually pull itself down too. It'll kind of match what the panel's doing without that solar charge controller.
Yeah, it depends on the type of battery chemistry. You need the controller when you're using a fairly substantial solar panel that's putting out several amps. So otherwise, it's not matched. So you have a situation where it's not matched. So the solar panel cannot deliver. It's not a regulated output from the panel. That's why the controller is required to regulate into the battery. Yep.
Yeah, and another thing is you hear sometimes people thinking they can go from controller to radio, which introduces some other issues.
Controller into the say again.
So if they bypass the radio and they go solar panel to controller and then controller to the radio, usually there's just not enough amps because some solar charge controllers have a direct out.
Yeah. That's right. So typically the reason you tap off the batteries, depending on the controller, some controllers, there's a maximum amount of amperage that the controller can deliver to the load equipment. In order to bypass that and then use the full capacity or full discharge current off the battery, you attach the equipment directly to the battery. You tap off the battery, as we say, directly to the equipment, so the equipment can directly operate from the battery, because we have the circuitry inside the battery that can handle that. And that's no problem. And then the controller, what it's doing is doing the regulating function from the panel, delivering the charge current that's needed into the battery. So then you can then effectively take out all of the discharge current out of the battery to power the radio equipment.
Yeah, and your battery at that point is a capacitor, so you get a cloud. You get somebody that stands in front of your panels asking you what you're doing. You're
right.
You start going say 100% off the battery until that cloud goes away or that person steps aside, or you readjust your panels. So yeah, that's what I was trying to always stress with people is don't skip those steps. You're not going to gain anything by skipping any of those or routing them different. So what is let's talk solar charge controllers, because there's different qualities there, and there's different additional items that come in solar charge controllers. What are those, and how does it benefit the process?
So there's different types of solar charge controllers. So we have a standard controller that offers a constant current, constant voltage charge profile. That has one of our entry-level controllers has a digital display and offers a constant current, constant voltage charge profile to charge up our batteries. Then we have a more advanced controller called an MPPT controller, maximum power point tracking, which actually has a computer algorithm built into it that actually searches and sweeps to find what they call the maximum power point or operating point to charge up the batteries from solar. The MPPT controller, what it does is it will find this operating point and actually searches for it so that you can effectively get a little bit more power out of the solar panel compared to the standard controller. The amount that you get is about around 10 to 15%. So on a percentage basis, that's what you're dealing with. So you'll see those gains in two ways. One, usually you'll see that for fairly large panels. So let's say you're going to be going to a large panel array, more than 120, 150 watts. If you're going to large panel arrays, then you use this MPPT controller to get maybe about 10 to 12, maybe about 12 more watts out of the panel versus the standard controller. This becomes a bit more useful when you have also days that are more cloudy. So if you have cloudier days, then you're trying to squeeze a bit more power out of the panels. For smaller panel arrays, let's say you're dealing with, our 28 watt, 60 watt, 80 watt panels in that range. You can use our standard controller. It has a digital display, does the job. There's no problem. So we have two different ones at two different price points. And then the MPPT controller, the more expensive controller, you also use that for larger panel arrays. So let's say you're going to build some larger solar panel array, use a lot of our foldable panels. Maybe you want to make something that's a few hundred watts. Then you would be using that controller to achieve that. And
one thing that's interesting, I don't think I didn't understand until recently, is with solar panels there is that sweet spot, because there is a point where if you draw maximum capacity out of that panel, it diminishes returns. It's if you can imagine it on a chart. The output kind of gets up to a peak, and then the more you draw, it actually starts going back down. So that's what that solar charge controller is doing, is finding where is that panel most efficient at, and it might not be at its maximum capacity of, say, a 100 watt panel, 100 watt output.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's a good point. So it will sweep for that. The algorithm actually will do that searching. It happens very quickly, within less than a second. So it's pretty fast in terms of finding that maximum point. That's a good point there. Yep.
And then how do you figure on, not all solar charge controllers are created equal? You gotta watch the amp draw. You can't overload the solar charge controller with too many panels. Yeah. So typically what you do is, there's one critical factor, is to make sure that typically we're looking at the wattage of the solar panels, and making sure that the maximum current going in is going to be less than 20 amps, at least for our 20 amp controllers.
And most solar panels that are, let's say, a 12-volt solar panel you're dealing with, it has an open circuit voltage of about around 20 volts. So if I have a 120-watt solar panel, I'm dealing with maybe about 5 to 6 amps coming out of that solar panel, or 60-watt panel, maybe about 3 amps or so max. So the amperage is not much of a concern. What we typically see is if you're going to go, let's say you're using larger wattage. Let's say you want to go to like 200 or 300 watts. Then your amperage starts going up. But what you do is you can actually use our MPPT controller and then put panels in series to increase the voltage, but you drop the charge current, because that solar controller, our MPPT controller, has the ability to accommodate an open circuit voltage of a solar panel up to 70 volts. So the current draw actually drops. Remember, so we increase voltage of the solar panel, we drop the charge current from the solar panel into the batteries, and then we can then get larger solar panel arrays, larger wattage ones, without exceeding the amperage of the controller. So what we're doing is we're putting that in series configuration to make higher voltage, and then we're decreasing the charge current from the solar panel so that we stay less than the 20 amps, and that we can do that with our MPPT controller up to 70 volts. Our digital display controller can now accommodate up to 50 volts, so that can allow us to accommodate for that as well. So we have the option of providing larger solar panel voltages in order to accommodate large panel arrays. So we've introduced these products within the past year and a half to accomplish that upon request from customers.
So that explains why it's important to know from the manufacturer of your panels whether you put them in parallel or series. So this explains why you can do both with your panels, with your solar charge controllers, is because if you go into series, you can maximize the panels without getting too much amperage.
Yeah, that's right. So you're still getting the same power, right? But we've increased the voltage by putting some panels in series, and then the current will drop, but we're still achieving the same high powers as well, and which is what we want. And so you have a lot of flexibility in that regards if you're going to be building up some larger solar panel arrays. I would say that you'll find that mostly with fixed installations, so or on an RV or camper where they have many solar panels mounted, or in a home installation. For portable use, we're typically dealing with solar panels that have an open circuit voltage that are about if you're using a 120 watt panel or a 150 watt panel, your open circuit's still about 18. Let's say it's about 20 volts open circuit. So you're still dealing with an amperage that's about for 120 watts about 5 amps and in that range. So it's the draw is not the charge current from the solar panel is not that high, but we have a lot of flexibility there.
So another thing I've been reading about is, and maybe it might have been from your specs, is not to mix manufacturers' panels. What's the circuitry issues behind that? Say you take a couple different manufacturers and you put them all together.
Well, there's a couple of things. If the manufacturers, if you're mixing different solar panels together, you have to keep in mind one thing. One is you have to look at the wattages of the solar panels, and you have to look at the open circuit voltages of the solar panels. So it's just a word of advice if you're going to be mixing different, if you will be mixing different panel manufacturers. So we want to make sure that you're getting the right efficiency also out of the solar panels being delivered through the controller to the batteries. That's what we're looking at, is just making sure everything is consistent. You're getting the right efficiency in there. Technically, the controller is looking at voltages coming out of the open circuit when you wire things up. So if you're using the MPPT controller, you just got to make sure that you're less than that 70 volts coming in, and then that the amp draw is going to be under 20 amps. If you're using that digital display controller, you just want to make sure you're less than that 50 volts, and again, your amperage is less than 20 amps. You can do it. One item we suggest is when you're building a panel array, one tip is to actually use a power analyzer otherwise known as a what's up meter. Various companies offer them, and you just put that between the solar panel to the controller if you want to see how much charge current's coming in. This will help you in troubleshooting as you do your setups or you build your setups. It's a very useful gadget. Quickly shows you amps coming in from the solar panel. And then you can also hook it up to the output of the battery to the radio as well to see how much amp hours are being consumed out of the battery into the load. So the little power analyzer gadgets do help a bit in installations.
They do. I like those. I just got I put those in just about every solar array, or you're always wanting to know. And this answer goes back to the question of what is my expected, what performance or how long can I get? Your setup is unique because your radio is different, the way you operate is different. And so those either What's Up or Tenergy or all those meters, those are great things. I just happened to get from West Mountain Radio a power check, which pretty much does the same thing, only it actually logs it, and then I can go home, because I typically at the end of the day I break down and I always seem to forget to look at the the meter to see what my daily draw was before I unplug it. And so yeah, those items are definitely a good thing to have. So with your solar panels, you are monocrystalline, which is the better of the two, I guess you could say, versus polycrystalline. What's with your panels that are the foldable metal ones with a tripod that kind of, or the bipod that sticks out the back? When people talk about it's a 60 watt panel or a 100 watt panel, what's in the circuitry of your panels, and then what's and not being in the Sahara, but what is your typical expected performance out of those panels? Say a 100 watt panel.
Yeah, monocrystalline solar panels offer a tremendous amount of power per unit square area for the price versus polycrystalline. So monocrystalline, it's a blackish tinge. The poly, which is based on the older technologies, pinkish or bluish. Monocrystalline offers the best performance for the price in today's market. And in terms of the performance, these particular panels, they use them on rooftop installations. They're commonly used, and what we've done is we've made it portable. We've put a stand, and we make a little suitcase. It has a little hinge, and then you put it in you can pack it up and take it with you. So you're getting quite a bit of power out of it, and you're getting also good performance over a large temperature range, which is nice. Typically, solar panels are rated based on a direct sunlight hitting the panel in terms of the wattage that you get out of it. So we say 120 watts, we're saying that's a peak wattage coming out of it. If you have cloudy days, depending on different parts of the country, you have to compensate. So in other words, you're trying to create a larger surface area to compensate. So we need to have larger panels in order to accomplish that. And so in certain parts of the country, they experience more cloudy days than other parts, depending on where you're at. We're in Southern California. It's pretty sunny throughout the year. And then other parts of the country, it's not. And so that's why we have larger portable setups for customers that want to operate in parts of the country where it's not as sunny. And that's how you typically do it.
So I've seen that, like you mentioned, temperature. The hotter the panels get, the diminished capacity, which I thought it was funny. I saw one panel for sale one time that said, do not put in direct sunlight. Because it heats up. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. So obviously, where is the heat on, where should we try and keep these at? I mean, say it's, like you said, Southern California, 90-degree day.
Yeah.
Do we need to bring those in every no, and cool them down, or? No,
it's not necessary. I mean, these are silicon panels are typically used in a lot of installations. I mean, you can handle ambience for solar panels up to about 140 Fahrenheit. I mean, it's pretty significant. 60 Celsius, 160 Fahrenheit. We're not getting to an ambient that's that high, but they that's what they were intended for. And we use materials to handle that kind of exposure which is not any problems there. So we have fairly large temperature operating ranges on purpose. You can put this out there in Southern California, Arizona. Customers using our solar panels in the hottest parts of the country, which is the Southwest, Southeast. It's not an issue in there as well. What we suggest is typically those customers are living in like conditions where you get a lot more cloudy days. So we get questions from customers is like, how much panel do I need? I'm not living in a sunny part of the country. And then we have to explain to them, well, you need to go to something larger to compensate, because if I give you a 120 watt solar panel and you don't have direct sunlight, you have cloudy days, you're not going to get 120 watts out of it. You'll get a bit less out of that. You may only get about 100 or 80 to 100 watts, maybe 80 watts out of the 120 watts on a cloudy day. In different parts of the country, the Midwest parts are not as sunny. So that's why we typically we suggest you kind of scale up if depending where you're at. Now, for those that are going backpacking in the mountains in Colorado or wherever you're at, they have fairly sunny days in the summer. It's fine. It's not much of an issue there. So that's why we have different size panels. We get questions like, why do you have so many different panels? And we explain, well, it just depends how much charge current you want, how fast you want to charge these batteries, and also the conditions where you live as well.
So your backpackers, you have two cloth ones. Only one of them will do charge for 12 volts. The other one is what, more for cell phones. So
right.
It's a 28 watt panel.
Yeah, the 28 watt panel is the BSP 28. That's a really nice backpacking for summits on the air, national parks on the air. That puts out about 20 volts at about 1.25 amps. And then you can chain them together as well. So that's for like charging up small batteries. Typically, we see customers that are using that to charge 3, 4.5, 6, 9, 12 amp hour batteries, 15. We've seen customers using it to charge the 20 amp hour. Just takes longer to charge a 20 amp hour. So what they'll do is they'll probably get a couple of those panels to charge it up. Now, the idea is what you want to do is there's a little trick, a little piece of advice is you're going to charge up the battery, let's say the night before. Let's say you use the AC to DC charger, and then you take the battery with the solar panel, you go out the next day, and then you can lay the panels out there, and then you can top off the battery while you're using it. So effectively, you have a battery that starts out full, and then you just continue to top it off while you're operating the equipment. So the 28 watt fits the niche where customers, they want to have something that's really compact and lightweight, and take it in their backpacks, and offers a fair degree amount of power in a small package.
And it's not going to be solely dependent. It's just going to, like we talked about before, buy you time. It's going to buy you an extra hour, or depending on how you operate, maybe a couple extra hours. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what we found, depending on what size of battery customers are using, and the equipment that they're operating as well.
So these cloth panels, they still need a solar charge controller before the battery?
Yeah, so the foldable panel, the 28 watt, you still run it through a solar charge controller because the DC output on it is unregulated. So it's not a regulated output. So that's why you still need to run that through a controller to plug that into the batteries, the discrete batteries. We do have other offerings called our Power Pack offerings that actually have the built-in controller and battery in there. So we have a product called the BPP 120 Power Pack, very popular product. That's for QRP radios. That's also for laptops and other kinds of cell phones as well. So there's quite a bit that offers in terms of a power pack and solar panel offering. The BSP 28 combined with that can be put together. But if you're going to hook up the BSP 28 to a battery, yes, you still need the controller box. That's right.
Okay. And your little that battery pack it's got quite a bit in it. So like I said, it's got the solar charge controller. It's even got an inverter. So, and your output on that, your DC output, is that power pull out, or is there
Yeah. So there's actually, we'll put accessories in there that will convert that to a barrel plug as well. So that's right.
Okay, so a couple more questions before we wrap up. Your cloth ones, this is you see this across the industry, that cloth typically tends to be more expensive. Is there higher cost materials in that, or is it just because it's not being produced as much, so it's economy of scale? What causes those lightweight ones to kind of be more higher in price per watt?
Yes, that's a good question. So they typically have the materials are a bit more expensive for the panels that are used in there. We typically that configuration does use a bit more expensive materials to produce it. So that's why it's at that price point for the 28 watt solar panels. We're hoping eventually we're going to get some more scale economies on the foldable panels to bring the price down. But that's kind of the story where it is right now. Okay.
So with your company, what without having everybody that's listening to this podcast sign a NDA agreement or a non-disclosure, what's the future with Bioenno, and what products are we looking at coming out in the future that's going to be beneficial to amateur radio operators?
Yeah, so we'll continue with power pack, battery development, solar charge controller, and power pack development as well. We continue to offer, as you probably saw, we've offered additional models of batteries in the 3 to 300 amp hour range. Now for ham radio, what we've seen is a lot of customers, they're typically purchasing batteries between the 3 and the 40 amp hour range. So we basically have put some enhancements in the packaging as well, in the batteries, some other geometries. So we'll be adding more different geometries as we go along. We got some more requests for that in recent months again. So we might be adding some more longer configurations as well, some square ones. We get those requests every so often. And then as you saw, we've added some additional solar controllers. We're working on another solar controller line that is going to add additional voltages up to. So we're going to have 12. We have a 12 and 24 dual voltage. Then we're working on a quad voltage one as well that has everything with the digital display. So we'll have some newer controllers coming out next year as well. And then we'll have the existing ones, which are quite popular right now. In terms of solar panels, we're looking at other configurations for the solar panels as we go along. So there'll be a lot of exciting new things as we go forward as well. Power pack development, we got a lot of traction in our power packs for radio communications. And then the batteries as well. So we're working across many different fronts.
Yeah, that power pack, that would be right in it right now. You have is it a 12 amp hour or a 10?
That's a 10 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one is for QRP radios, and then we go to the discrete batteries for high wattage radios. And so we have several options that are available as well. We find that a lot of customers, they want to custom configure their kits. So what we've done is we have you can choose your panel, right, and you can choose the battery, you can choose the controller, because a lot of hams like to do their own thing and then choose the size of the batteries and do it themselves. But then we have the power pack products, which have a selected battery in there. So we give everyone options. Whatever they want to do.
Okay. Anything we haven't covered or you want to get before we wrap up?
Right now, we'll be going out to some more events and shows. We've went to PacificCon in San Ramon. That was the last major ham show in the country, at least on the West Coast, probably in the country right now for 2017. And then we'll be going to a lot more other hamfests and ham mention next year as well. So we'll be going to quite a few coming up. We'll be also at different. We go to other industry trade shows as well. So we cater into other markets. We're in the marine market as well now. So we go to the Fred Hall Fishing Show in Long Beach and other parts of California. And then we also go to the motorcycle show coming up in next month, the International Motorcycle Show in Long Beach as well. And that will be pretty exciting. It shows our high rate starter lines that are used for motorcycles. So we'll be going to a lot of events, and we're looking forward to it. And just wanted to also appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. So wanted to extend our gratitude.
Yes, thank you very much for coming on. Like I said, I've been using your stuff for a while now. We've kind of, you've been a great resource to email back and forth. And so I think this podcast will be a good one in a library. So when people are kind of looking at this technology and understanding the difference, I think we've pretty much given it a good carryover to kind of educate the listeners on what's out there.
Yeah, and we look forward to being on future podcasts as well. And if you have any of your listeners have any questions, we can certainly answer them in the next go around next time.
Yes, we will definitely do that. I appreciate that offer. In the show notes, we'll have a link to all your address. We'll have those charts that we kind of talked about and all the information and where people can go to Bioenno Power to get their stuff. So thank you for coming on the show, Kevin.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin, once again for coming on the show. You can see in a few of my videos on YouTube how I have implemented the LiFePO4 batteries and the Bioenno solar panels in the field. I encourage you to check those out on our YouTube channel. I mentioned at the top of the show that Chameleon Antenna is the sponsor of this show. If you are looking for a well-built, well-designed antenna for your field setup or even your home, please check them out at chameleonantenna.com or look in our show notes for a link. In the Everything Ham Radio podcast, I mentioned how I would use the training items sparingly where there was time to fill on the podcast. Curtis mentioned how I should keep them in the show, so I'll take that listener feedback and make sure to keep the training items where I can. In this training item, I discuss winter preparedness. For those of us in locations that get winter weather, or if you plan on traveling through parts of the nation that get winter weather, this is the time of year to start getting prepared. Hello, this is John W7DBO with this training item. With cold weather upon us and holiday travels, I thought it would be a good time to refresh our minds on cold weather preparedness. I often like to think that our emergency communication events will be in nice sunny weather. However, odds are greater to have an emergency in cold weather than warm weather. With winter storms, our roads become impassable and our electrical infrastructure has greater odds of failing. So we not only need to prepare ourselves and our families for cold weather, but also our equipment. We first need to look at our vehicles and make sure they are prepared for winter travel. If you are milking the last 2,000 miles off your tire tread, you should replace them before traveling in winter weather. Check all of your fluids and make sure they are changed according to maintenance or topped off. Check for wear and replace windshield wipers if needed. Cold weather brings out the weak batteries, so replace if needed. Lastly, always maintain at least a half a tank of gas in your vehicles. This is good habit year-round. In an emergency event, your vehicle will become your shelter in place. Regular items in your car should be enhanced during the winter weather. These items can include tire chains, extra cold weather gear for each family member, blankets, snow shovel, and a bag of sand or cat litter. A good alternative for the sand or cat litter if you do not have room is purchasing from a thrift store some used doormats. These work great to gain traction and something nice to kneel or lay down on when putting tire chains on. Remember, if placed in an emergency situation, you may have to get inventive to survive. There was a report several years ago where a lost couple used the seat backs of their car as snowshoes. In an emergency, your knowledge is your greatest tool to survival. We often say to stage your equipment for use, keep the batteries charged and bags packed. But if you have to deploy in cold weather, is your clothing staged also? I have taken a large gym bag and equipped it with enough layers of clothing and accessories to survive in the mountains in the winter. I was able to build this bag with acquired winter clothing from years of past skiing and winter camps. Your winter go bag should have outer layers, mid layers, insulating layer, and extremity protection. In addition, you should have cold weather related gear, snowshoes, heat packs, blankets, and a cold weather fire starting kit. Hunter orange vests are an essential item to have in the winter to be seen easily by land or air. You should take a couple extra steps to prepare your radio equipment for cold weather duty also. The two issues most likely you will encounter is poor battery performance and brittle plastic parts. Protect your equipment as much as possible from dramatic temperature changes. This forms condensation on electronic parts. Avoid extreme heat exposure from heating devices. A good rule of thumb is when huddled around a heater, if you smell burning plastic, it's your radio. To get some more life out of your batteries, wrap them up in a blanket when not in use. We typically set our batteries on the ground. This is where cold air pools. Set them up a bit to prevent this pooling from happening. Equipment gets brittle in the cold. Take extra care to protect your equipment from damage. In conclusion, be extra vigilant with safety. Mark well any hazards, such as cable runs or guy lines. Everything hurts worse in the cold. Keep an eye on electrical connections, as they may rest in water. Be cautious with heating equipment and fuel. Follow all best practices on storage, use, and proper ventilation. Be observant with each other and monitor health and well-being. The winter weather takes common hazards up a notch. I hope you have found this training item helpful. For a list of cold weather-related items, they can be found on my website at w7dbo.net. This is John, W7DBO, with the training item. This will do it for this episode. Thank you again, Kevin Zanjani with Bioenno Power, for coming on the show. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or want a certain topic covered, please contact me at John, John, at hamradio360.com. And thank you again for Chameleon Antenna for sponsoring this episode. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to John at hamradio360.com. 73.